So you good? Oh, that was convincing. Sometimes things don't work out the way that you hope they would, right? Like when your husband buys you a 3-carat ring for Christmas. Has that not just been your experience of life, though, that sometimes things don't work out the way that you hoped, right? But sometimes they do. And sometimes things work out better than you could ever have hoped. Like they did for Zach Brown of Ohio. On the 3rd of July 2014, Zach Brown probably... Alright, are we good? Am I on?
Yep.
You can hear me? Can you see me? Seeing me is the main headline. Good. So on the 3rd of July 2014, Zach Brown, probably for a joke, launched a Kickstarter campaign so he could afford to make himself a potato salad. Yes, just a potato salad, not hundreds of them, just one. You know the drill. Mashed potatoes, some mayonnaise, some hard-boiled eggs, some celery seeds, some mustard, paprika, bacon bits, if you like that kind of thing. It's not the sort of thing you typically have to crowdfund for, because you don't need much money to make a potato salad. Brown's fundraising goal was therefore quite modest. All he was hoping to raise from his crowdfunding campaign was $10 measly. That's all. And this is the actual photo he used in his Kickstarter campaign. His headline was, "I'd like to make myself a potato salad, and all I need is someone to give me $10. Who's in?" He got a little more than $10. Within a couple of hours, Brown had raised $100. This attracted the attention of several online media outlets, and before long, his crowdfunding campaign went viral. Within a few days, he'd raised $55,000. After making himself a potato salad, he spent the rest of the money throwing a potato-themed music festival called Potato Stock. Thousands of people attended. There were potato sack races, Mr. Potato head stations, and of course lots of potato salad, but that wasn't enough. The success of his Kickstarter campaign attracted sponsors. The Idaho Potato Commission provided Brown with all the potatoes he needed for his event. Hellmann's donated the requisite amount of mayonnaise, and Potato Stock, free to the public, sold potato-based concessions, with all the proceeds, tens and tens and tens of thousands of them, going to help the homeless in central Ohio. Not bad for a $10 joke. And I mentioned that because every single part of the Bible that talks about the birth of Jesus talks about it in a context where people expected the worst, but they were surprised with something altogether different. And so with your permission this morning, I should like to teach you from a very well-known but little understood part of the Christmas story. The words go something like this. You'll recognize them from your religious-themed Christmas cards. "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Now let me just say to you that if you're new to church and you're not really into the Bible thing, then you've come to church on the right day. Because what I'm going to do this morning will feel less like a Bible lesson and more like a history lesson. I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of facts your way. These are facts you can get from any half-decent library. And then at the very end, I'll relate those facts to this particular bit of the Christmas story. And then by the time you go home and catch Grandma kissing Santa under the Christmas tree, you'll feel very clever. Okay, sound fair?
Sure.
Good. Right, so let's start with a short history lesson. And I'll begin with the Empire of Ancient Assyria. So, talking now about events that take place about 900, 800, 700 years before the birth of Christ. Now, for people like me who are interested in history, the Assyrian Empire matters because it's the first real empire that the world had ever known. It stretched from Egypt in the west to Iran in the east, and never before had such a large swathe of the world been administered by one man. And when the prophet Isaiah wrote down this morning's Christmas verse, that one man was Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, patron saint of elaborate facial hair and of hipsters. Which is kind of important because, let me just say as an aside, you know, I take it, ladies, that anyone who has facial hair that elaborate spends too much time in the mirror, right? Male grooming is, I didn't intend to tell you this, but I went for one of those, I treated myself last week to a shave. You know, like in those old barber shops? Yeah. So I go in and I get this $10 shave, and it was rather fantastic. And then at the end of the thus far great experience, the barber, who was a recent immigrant from Albania, said to me quite nonchalantly, "Would you like eyebrows shaved?" I didn't know that was a thing. Is that a thing? Men, is that...
Just for you.
I didn't know men got their eyebrows shaved, and I mentioned this to my Albanian friend. I said, do men get their eyebrows shaved? Is that even a thing? Without missing a beat, and without any sarcasm whatsoever, he said, "Yeah, sure. Old men all the time come in. Get eyebrows shaved." No Christmas tip for you. So, for the ancient kings of Assyria, with their fancy hipster facial hair, vanity is a huge issue. Now, I know you can't relate to any modern world leaders for whom vanity is an issue, so you'll just have to use your imagination. In almost every piece of ancient Assyrian writing, most of which is now in the British Museum in London, these guys talk about how important it is for them to conquer a certain city so that they can then erect a statue of themselves in the middle of that city. My favourite piece of Assyrian egotism comes from a stone tablet called the Prism of Sennacherib. Here's what it says. He says, "In my third campaign I marched against Hatti." Hatti is modern-day Turkey, I guess. And on the way to Hatti, Luli, the king of Sidon, and look at this next line, "whom the terror-inspiring glamour of my lordship had overwhelmed, fled before my awe-inspiring splendor." Oh yeah, baby. You just know that whatever issues that guy had in life, self-confidence was not one of them. Don't worry about being nervous around me. I get that a lot. You're probably just overwhelmed by my awe-inspiring splendor. So you get the idea. The kings of Assyria are men who are head over heels in love with themselves. And you can tell that by looking at their carvings, right? Let's just go back to Tiglath-Pileser III for a second. Any man who spends this much time grooming his facial hair clearly spends too much time in the mirror. Given that that's the case, he's either going to be an ancient Assyrian or a modern Italian. Speaking of Italians, the kings of Assyria ran what I think was the world's first protection racket. So in every single one of their writings, they say something to the effect of, "I attacked a certain city, I killed lots of the people, then I erected a big statue of myself in the middle of the city with my facial hair proudly showing, and then I demanded that every year thereafter they would pay me a tribute of gold and silver and so on and so forth." So here's a slide from something called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser. This is an important artifact for students of the Bible. So in it, you can see the Assyrian king Shalmaneser, and bowing before him is a conquered king bringing him his yearly tribute. Underneath this image, it says this: the tribute of Jehu, son of Omri. By the way, these are this particular story is mentioned in the Bible. As a student of the Bible and as a student of history, I find very little dissimilarities from the ancient world, which I like. Anyway, the tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with a pointed bottom, because the round ones are too cheap, golden tumblers, golden buckets, and a staff for a king. So you know what this is, right? This is like one of those scenes from the Godfather movie or The Sopranos. And on the surface, it's all very friendly. On the surface, it's all very genteel. You know, I'm going to walk into your restaurant. I'm going to ask you how business is. I'm going to ask you how the family are. I'm going to ask you how your kids are enjoying their new school. But the subtext is, give me my protection money or bad things will happen to your kneecaps. That's what's going on here. And so as you can imagine, the kings of Assyria were unapologetically cruel. Here's a classic scene from one of their inscriptions. I barely need to describe what's going on here. Here are people who didn't pay the protection money. You don't pay the protection money, you end up on a spike. Why do I have a soundtrack in my head for that? This is what happens to you when you don't cooperate. Now, back to Tiglath-Pileser III. Of all the men who ever ruled over Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser was by far the greatest. In terms of science and politics and warfare and cruelty, none of his successors went as far as he did, and none of his predecessors did either. Now here's where the Bible and history and Christmas collide. In the year 734 BC, Tiglath-Pileser begins a campaign to capture the important trade route running along the Gaza coast from Egypt to Turkey. This trade route directly affected the affairs of three small kings: the king of Damascus, the king of Samaria, and the king of Jerusalem. The two kings of Damascus and Samaria correctly realized that on their own they could never hope to hold out against the larger army of Tiglath-Pileser. So they formed a coalition. They got together and they said, here's what we should do. We should pool our resources, we should pool our soldiers, we should pool our collective know-how, and we should stand up against the Assyrian bully. We should be the first nations in the world who say enough is enough, we're not paying any more money. Having formed this coalition, they then go to Jerusalem and invite the king there to join them. His response went something to the effect of, "Are you high? Do you have any concept of what the kings of Assyria do to people who don't pay? Haven't you seen the pictures with the bodies on spikes? It's bad. We don't know. I'm not joining your crazy coalition." The two kings of Damascus and Samaria were not too impressed with this cowardly response, so they attacked Jerusalem. And although they didn't manage to breach its walls or anything like that, they did destroy the surrounding countryside, and estimates from the period say that hundreds of thousands died. Bethlehem, by the way, is just outside Jerusalem. In response to this near-total disaster, the king of Jerusalem, a man called Ahaz, goes into the Temple of Solomon, the sacred space of the Jewish faith and the central bank of the Jewish nation. He strips it of everything of value, packs it on a cart, sends it to Tiglath-Pileser III, and says, "O magnificent, splendorous one, your awe-inspiring splendor has overwhelmed me. Please take this tribute. Please. You haven't asked for protection money yet, but I'm offering it to you. Rescue me from the kings of Damascus and Samaria." So let's say you're living in Bethlehem, just outside Jerusalem in 734 BC. For reasons entirely out with your control, the thread upon which your happiness hangs has now snapped. The bottom has fallen out of your world for four terrible reasons. Reason number one, your friends and family have just been killed by the kings of Damascus and Samaria. People you've known and loved your entire life are no longer in this world. The people in whom you found your happiness are gone. Reason number 2, in that same conflict, your crops, your livelihood, your industry has been taken. Your livelihood is lost. You're now facing a lifetime of poverty. All of the assumptions you had for your future lie in smouldering ruins. Reason number 3, you're now in a relationship with the mob. You're owned by the king of Assyria, whom you know well, puts bodies on spikes. Reason number 4, your country is now bankrupt. All of your money has just been given as protection money to the king of Assyria, and he'll be back next year for more. You're so far behind, you'll never get ahead. You're so deep in a hole, you'll never climb your way out of it. Fair to say that if you're living in Bethlehem in 734 BC, your life is now suddenly joyless. It is now a torturous sentence that you will endure at best. Getting by is the best you can now hope for. You can see, you can feel, you can hope for no way forward. While all of that is going on, Isaiah writes the words that you recognize from your Christmas cards. He writes them as a response to what's just happened. And he begins them with the word, nevertheless. Oh, I like that word a lot. The Hebrew word he uses means something like suddenly, surprisingly, out of the blue. And when you are stuck in a hopeless situation, nevertheless strikes a discordant note. In using that word, Isaiah is saying, listen, I know that right now you can't see a way forward. I know that right now the future seems rather bleak, but believe me, your present pain stands in stark contrast to the joy and the happiness and the surprise that is just around the corner for you. Believe me, your anguish will not last forever. This darkness will not stick around forever. This thing you're currently going through, you are going through it, and you won't go through it forever. You will, nevertheless, surprisingly, suddenly, come through the other end, and it will get better. He's saying to his friends in Bethlehem as they look at the charred remains of their life, don't fall into the trap of thinking that this thing you see is all that there is. There is a horizon. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. It's good. Will you hold on to nevertheless for one more day? Will you believe in better for one more day? He goes on, he says, there will be how much gloom? Oh, no more. There will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. You will know warmth because you felt the cold. You will know light because you have known darkness. You will know happiness because you know very well how sadness feels. He says in the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. This is interesting. The land of Zebulun and Naphtali are in the northernmost part of Israel. And in the story of the Bible, the people who lived there have a very checkered history. It was in this region that the people of God first began to experiment with other gods. It was in this region that the people of God first began to enjoy the living of an immoral life. And when Isaiah says that in the past God humbled them, what he means is that in the past God allowed them to face the consequences of their own behavior. He allowed their life to come to a point where all of their mistakes caught up with them. This region was colloquially known as Galilee of the Gentiles. The word Gentile means foreigner, and for several generations the Assyrian army had come and gone out of Galilee, so much so that nobody there knew whether or not they were even real Jews. The word Galilee of the Gentiles is a way of saying, we're not sure who your fathers were. you understand? We're pretty sure what kind of women your mothers were. We're pretty sure how receptive they were to foreign Assyrian soldiers. The phrase Galilee of the Gentiles is an Iron Age way of saying, let me tell you about the worst government housing project you can imagine. Let me tell you about a place where most homes are single-parent households. Let me tell you about a place where most people live on or near or below the breadline. Let me tell you about a place where a hydro bill is a real struggle for most. Let me tell you about a place where people live with the social and economic consequences of not having a father around. In the past, those people lived with nothing but darkness and anxiety and fear and hopelessness and an inability to see a way through where they currently were. But, another word I like, but, in the future he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles. So here is what God is like, Isaiah is saying. At the point where we most feel the effects of living in a broken, damaged, messed up, sinful world. At the point in our own story that is the lowest and the darkest and the most hopeless, at that point, you will see light again. He says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, that is, the events set in motion by Tiglath-Pileser III, on those people a light has dawned. Now clearly, this is a revisionist way of looking at the past in the light of the future. This is like God saying to a woman racked with guilt because of an earlier abortion that she has heard the cry of an unborn child. This is like God saying to a drug addict whose addiction has robbed him of family and resources that he has seen the sights and smelled the smells and heard the laughter of a family Christmas in a home full of love and prosperity and wholeness. This is like God saying to a person, I will reach out to you and embrace you in your shame, and in that embrace I will promise you a future that is better than your past. I will show you days that are far better than today. This is God saying, I will get involved in your life because nothing in your life is enough to keep me from you. Galilee, the mess of the Gentiles, the darkness, the shame, the hopelessness, whatever. A light is coming. A hope will dawn. Then in the next sentence it gets stupid. Happiness sometimes is. Sometimes it is. Talking to people who know nothing but sadness, he says of God, you enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you. Think of the context as he writes these words. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest. This is a picture of insane happiness. So, in the ancient world, people, as you know, depended on grain for food. And so at the end of the harvest, once the grain was in, people knew that they would eat for another year. And so they always had end-of-year harvest parties at which they celebrated for days on end. It was like Christmas on steroids. It was like eat till your stomach hurts, dance till your feet have blisters, drink till ugly women are pretty. It was a happy time. Isaiah is saying, I know at the moment you're in this, and this seems like it's all that there is, but trust me, one day and one day soon, you will know a happiness you've hitherto not experienced. There is light. There is hope. Can you hang on? Can you wait? It's coming. It's coming. For as in the day of Midian's defeat you have shattered the yoke that burdens them. The Assyrian kings spoke about tax. You can't relate to this tax stuff, so just listen. They would invent ways. This is so irrelevant to you. They would invent ways of taking money from people. I know, right? And they would talk about their tax as a yoke. And they would boast about how they would put a yoke on top of the people that was so heavy that the best people could ever hope for was just to get by. Just enough. Isaiah says, you will be happy because one day God will break the thing that burdens you. What burdens you? And then Isaiah tells these people that the idea of a better tomorrow is not an abstract fairy tale. It is incarnated in a person, apparently. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. Here's the paradox then of the Bible. How will God deliver his people from the arrogance and the war and the oppression and the coercion of the Assyrians? By being more arrogant, more warlike, more coercive, more oppressive? No. From this ancient and weird text, the face of a child peers out, giving us the hope and the promise of a better tomorrow. I know there was a crying kid here at the beginning, and very kindly and sensitively to me, they left, but I'm kind of sorry they did, because there's nothing like the sound of a child to remind you that life goes on. Life is good. Life is irresistible and amazing, and it finds a way. So will you. You found a way before, you'll find a way again. You're good. No, really, you are. You're good at this. The government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. The word zeal is a word of passion. Isaiah is saying to his broken friends that God is emotionally, passionately driven by the welfare of his broken people. So if the thread upon which your happiness hangs has snapped, or is threatening to snap, if the bottom has fallen out of your world, if the consequences of your failure or the failure of others are ruining your life, or if indeed that ruin is caused by nothing other than the sheer misfortune of this world, if the cold and uncaring winds of fate have blown you to things that may very well bear you from this world, then you need to hear that God is emotionally driven by his love for you. The Christmas story isn't about eggnog and tinsel. I mean, it's a lot about that, but it's mainly about dramatic reversals of fortune. It's about a story that's supposed to be bad that ended up being good. It's about God saying, you know what, the bad guys don't win this time. The pain doesn't get to win this time. The darkness doesn't win. The sickness doesn't win. The things that you have done that have so ruined your life doesn't win. The last word will never be the wrong that was done. The last word is the right that God has done. It will not be the pain that you or others have made for you. It will be the life and the future that God has made for you. And insofar as that is what the Christmas story is about, the Christmas story, perhaps more than any other of the Bibles, demands faith of those who hear it. The Christmas story asks you to believe that, contrary to appearances, this isn't it. That contrary to appearances, sadness does not win. And for that reason, the story of the Christmas, and indeed the story of Christ, is called Good News. And so I invite you to try best you can to place your hand into the hand of God and believe with this ancient writer that there is light at the end of the dark tunnel. And not only will you see it, you will feel its warmth upon your face. I think I better go, but I think I know you reasonably well. And here's what I think I understand about you. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll bet that the things you really want for Christmas can't be bought with money. Am I right? 2 no's and many yeses. Okay. I bet what you'd really, really, really like doesn't come from a mall or from a catalogue. You can't get it by handing over your credit card. It's something bigger, something deeper, something far more difficult. And I pray that as the year turns, as the longest day gives way to the second, shortest day gives way to the second shortest, and the third and the fourth, and things get lighter and lighter, I pray God gives you those things. And I pray that you get surprised with life's goodness. Because goodness only knows you've probably had enough surprises of life's badness. And I pray that for you, and I hope that with you. Merry Christmas. God bless you. God bless you indeed.
Thank you.